But dearly beloved, welcome to our 219th online gathering for faith leaders across the country, now called Creating Beloved Community. This regular gathering is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jason O'Neill. I use any and all pronouns, and I'm honored to be one of your facilitators today.
And I am Solveig Nielsen-Gooden, pastor here in the Oregon Synod. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm your other facilitator. In attunement with the Truth and Healing movement of the ELCA and moving toward right relationship with our Indigenous siblings and neighbors, let's begin with a land acknowledgement. I invite you to root yourself in the land where you are. We're gathered together from all parts of Turtle Island, also referred to as North America. We are connected by the breath given us by the breath maker and by the very piece of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We understand that all land is Indigenous land. And we invite each of you to name in the chat the Indigenous peoples or tribal nations whose lands you occupy now. We also acknowledge the terror of colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, broken treaties, stolen land, forced removal, and boarding schools, as well as the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children each year, and the ripple effects of violence still being experienced today. We know that Indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but are part of our communities. They offer invaluable wisdom for how we exist in relationship with Mother Earth, as well as our human and non-human neighbors.
Also important for us to offer a labor acknowledgement. With permission granted by Dr. Tara T.J. Stewart, we acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants who suffered the horror of transatlantic trafficking, slavery, and Jim Crow laws. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we acknowledge the tremors of that violence throughout the generations and the resulting impact that can still be felt and witnessed today.
Another vital part of creating beloved community is fostering a sense of belonging. So we invite you to update your name, if it's not updated already, to include your pronouns. This is just one more way we can express welcome for all of God's children. And at any point during these gatherings, you can access the captions option in the Zoom menu on your device. It might also show as an icon with the letter CC in a box. You might need to click on 3 little dots or swipe to a different screen within Zoom to access this option. So let's continue our work together toward healing and justice by entering into a place of peace and listening together. Through these regular gatherings, we've developed a covenant of how we enter and interact in this space. We're committed to creating a safer and braver space where each of us are able to bring the truth of who we are and how we're doing. If you share something today that you wish for us to edit out of the recording, just let us know afterwards. And with all of this said, we affirm these conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ, the beloved community.
And as Bell Hooks wrote in All About Love, rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And today, and every second Wednesday of 2025, we will journey with Indigenous author Vine Deloria Jr. and engage with Custer Died for Your Sins and Indian Manifesto. A reminder about our journey together, we are all learning from this Indigenous elder through his writing. So Solveig and I are not teaching, we're just facilitators in this space each month.
So let's begin again by hearing these words from the preface of this book, just to keep us, to ground us again in and why it's important that we're doing this work. Vine Deloria Jr. writes, But the Indian task of keeping an informed public available to assist the tribes in their efforts to survive is never ending. And so the central message of this book, that Indians are alive, have certain dreams of their own, and are being overrun by the ignorance and the mistaken, misdirected efforts of those who would help them, can never be repeated too often. So just as a reminder, we have a covenant of how we gather together here. So we're going to just remind ourselves to share from our head and our heart. We're going to practice awareness of space and time of how we're sharing with one another. We're going to practice stepping up and stepping back. So know yourself, know your typical patterns of communication, and just be aware of how that is manifesting in the circle so that everyone has a space and time to share. And just remembering that we're always learning, always, always, always learning. And that is the point. That's the point. So with that, we have had the practice of beginning our gatherings by gathering what we have noticed, our noticings, our wonderings, our agitations, and our invitations to growth. So we're going to invite you, we're going to take 5 minutes of quiet space. And in that time, we invite you to type into the chat direct quotes from chapter 3 that we read this time. Include the page numbers, please, or a specific thought that really caught you. So anything you noticed, anything you're wondering about, questions, anything was really agitating, something inviting growth. You can also do a little emoji, respond to each other's quotes. So if somebody puts in a quote that you're like, yeah, that one, go ahead and give it a heart or a thumbs up or something like that, so we can get a sense of the pieces of learning that have a lot of energy. And then we'll look at those together. So about 5 minutes, and go ahead and just put all your noticings and wonderings in the chat. And in a few minutes, we'll start reading them aloud.
Let me go ahead and start reading aloud, maybe. Okay. So for the recording and maybe for those who cannot access the chat, let me from page 76, America has been sick for some time. It got sick when the first Indian treaty was broken. It has never recovered. Oh, look, that one's repeated. Page 76. America has been sick for some time. It got sick when the first Indian treaty was broken. It has never recovered. My heart breaks as I read and look back on this chapter. The systematic legislative ignorance, always tilted in favor of the colonizers and hardly ever creating space for the peoples involved to speak for themselves, or if they do, to be heard and heeded. When a policy is used as a weapon to force cultural confrontation, then the underlying weakness of society is apparent. No society which has real and lasting values need rely on force for their propagation. And I think I saw that a little bit later. That's on page 77. Um, Commenting on after they voted, they found out the details. Page 77, if America has done to us as it wishes others to do to her, then the future will not be bright. America is running up a great debt. It may someday see the wholesale despoliation of its lands and people by a foreign nation. And then repeating this one from page 77, when a policy is used as a weapon to force cultural confrontation, then the underlying weakness of society is apparent. No society which has real and lasting values need rely on force for their propagation. From page 73, they would then be judged too incompetent to handle their own money, but competent enough to vote to sell their reservation. Is it any wonder that Indians distrust white men? Unbearable pressures, lies, promises, and threats of termination were made whenever a tribe won funds from the US because of past swindles by the federal government. I'm not sure if that's a page number or someone's summary. The last lines make me think about one of the possible timelines of the path we are currently on. Just watching language for, yeah, anyway. If America has done to us as it wishes others to do to her, then the future will not be bright. America is running up a great debt. It may someday see the wholesale despoliation of its lands and people by a foreign nation. Again, from page 77. Um, let's see, not gotten the book yet. Attended a meeting in which Onondaga elders shared what they wanted to say for 2 hours. One thing that impressed me was the opening prayer of Thanksgiving in the tribal language. It was about a 10-minute sample of the ritual prayer that would have lasted a couple of hours in an Onondaga meeting. Would uh, would that I would give thanks so wholeheartedly for all the blessings of this beautiful land and the people who make my life rich and the love of God. From page 75, had the churches supported the Indian people in 1954, we would be tempted to believe they're sincere about civil rights today. But when the going, my mouse is being weird. When the going is rough, church disappear from sight. Judas, not Peter, characterizes the apostolic succession. Also, page 75, would be tempted to believe their sincerity about civil rights today. From page 64, the Klamath Bill had been so hastily written that it had to be amended to prevent a wholesale collapse of the lumber industry on the West Coast. Since it had originally called for immediate clear cutting of $80 million worth of timber, the market appeared headed for total disaster because of the great quantity of wood that would suddenly depress the market. Sounds familiar to today. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm caught up.
Oof. It's interesting to me that I know in the last couple sessions there's been like a huge variety of quotes that have jumped out for people, and today there's a lot of overlap. So wondering what people are noticing about that or feeling about that, or if you want to say more about the quote that you put into the chat. Oh, thanks, Jill. Just added something. The war on poverty named on page 70. I am so disappointed that the state of Wisconsin was a proponent of this. This movement led to an increasing infant death rate with the Menominee tribe. My heart breaks a million times.
And this sets the stage so for the quote at the top of page 75, at least in my hard copy book, that termination is the single most important problem of the American Indian people at the present time. If you kill the babies, if you let the babies die, it's easy to erase a population. It's so disgusting. I know I've said in this space before, bile in my throat as I have to say these words. And think about how I'm complicit.
Yeah, Sunny, so interesting how quickly we criticize other countries for not honoring treaties. And then you look at this chapter and it's disappointing to say the least.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn because I don't know if I had joined this many times. I think at least once or twice. But as I was reading this and responding to the last comment, it was like, do what I say, but don't do what I do, if you will. um, but what I want to share was growing up in Guyana, South America. As a very little boy, we see movies of Indians and white. We usually call white and Indians. And it's movies and not knowing or realizing this is really happening. But in movies, sometimes it have good endings. And so to portray, most of the time, Indians were portrayed as a bad people, if you will. And it kind of like, this is reality. As I was reading, I was like, wait, but this is real. This is not movie. This is real. And coming out from a different culture and looking into, I'm still wondering if, and I appreciate this group here, but I'm wondering how many of other considered Americans realize that this was happening and it's still happening. Not only I would say in the Indian culture, but other cultures as well. We sometimes don't see that as somebody who is of a different color skin and have different communities. But I thought I share that.
Thank you. One of
Isn't
my friends,
that what we're doing with the Ukrainians, not honoring a agreement that we made with them to get rid of their nukes and then cut off their support? It's definitely still happening.
Mukesh, your comment reminded me of something that my friend Randy Woodley, who's an Indigenous author and farmer out here in Oregon, said, because he does a lot of teaching, with white communities, white church communities, and inevitably every single time somebody or many people will say, how is it that I could have grown up, in the church or just in school or whatever, and not known this? How could I have grown up and not known this, and or never learned it? And his response is, well, that was the point. You weren't meant to. That's how it can keep happening. Which I think is actually just a really important remembering, because there can be so much shame that happens from not knowing, and that's a real response. And I think it's a totally legitimate response to, oh my gosh, people are suffering. I didn't know, and I didn't do anything about it, or I did, so I think that feeling, is real and genuine, and that piece from Randy is meant to say, no, wait, we have been manipulated in the process too, right? by having information and knowledge and history kept from us intentionally.
I also wonder if, because we are living in such an individualistic society, it doesn't affect us, means it's not happening, or we don't even really care.
I'd like to make a comment. In terms of what's going on today, when I started reading the chapter, I said it's going on right now under the Trump administration. And Native News Online is a newspaper that comes in every single day into my inbox, which says, here's what's going on in Indian country. And because of this thing of cost savings, the Indian Health Services is being impacted. All the funding that goes to Indian and Native colleges is being impacted. They are withdrawing property from reservations. It's going on and on and on. And the Indian community is well aware of this and they're publicizing it. So if you want to see what the cost savings that are going on or how they're impacting Indian country, I would look at Native News Online. And that's one way to stay informed and to see what's happening today, not necessarily what happened in the past.
I really appreciate that, Linda. I hope that some people have connected with that. That was an invitation at the beginning of the class to connect up with some online, newsletters or whatever. And that was deeply impactful for me in this chapter. The what is justified under the thin guise of cost savings.
Could someone repeat, nativenews.com is not a website that's available. Is there something?
It's Native News Online, and it's a free
Native News Online. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, going back to what you said, Mukesh, about the individualistic culture and worldview. And I'm curious, like how other people experience that or notice it or witness it. How that worldview that we're a part of plays out or impacts us or people that in relation to this work around Indigenous peoples or not.
I think this connects. I was bothered by the statement in the book too about the churches really did nothing because there was more publicity to focus on the civil rights pieces. And that took me just to thinking about how often, as you were saying, how often or how we choose to get involved at what topics and at what level all comes back to what's comfortable. And whether that's because we know someone or it just feels safe. I'm in Nebraska and I'm very disappointed that we have a boarding school that's been here. There's only one that's been identified so far in Nebraska, but there's been no bodies found, but everybody knows they're there somewhere. But we as a church and that community has a Lutheran church, and we're just not talking about it. But we certainly go to Synod Assembly and we do our land acknowledgement. And we kind of pat ourselves on the back for the fact of we did this and we named all these nations and tribes, but yet here it is right here in our backyard. And we're just going to avoid that conversation. So I think You know, and we've got discrimination and prejudice that's lived forever in the prairies between the Danes and the Norwegians and the Germans and so it's here, but we just pick and choose which topic we'd like to be invested in today. So a disappointment that we claim all that welcome and equality and everything, and yet we struggle with how to live that out. And we become more of the problem oftentimes than we are the solution.
Sunny, thank you for saying that out loud. I really am with you on this. It's so easy to just go to what we're comfortable with. And if any of you here or any of you listening to this recording would like to work with a coach to figure out what is my call in this space, what is a step I can take that's outside of my comfort zone, please connect with me. We will put in the chat, and Jason will put with the recording how to get in touch with me. If I don't personally work with you, one of our coaches will. I think it's so important for us to challenge ourselves, just like our sibling Sunny just named, to step outside of what is comfortable. And I'm so grateful to our facilitators for helping us dig into this material that is not comfortable, to realize all the things that were hidden from us, or we were blatantly lied to about, or maybe we heard it and we did that thing of, that just feels icky and complicated. I don't need to think about that today. Today's the day, friends. Today's the day.
You know, and I might circle back on that, what you just said, Jill, but connect it with this individualism too, because I think that like, I mean, we're just steeped in it. We're just steeped in it. And so it's always operative. And I really feel it operating at this precise moment, right? When I hear the challenge from you, Jill, like to take a step out of the comfort zone, right? And because I'm so steeped in individualism, that's terrifying. And it could be enough. It often is enough to say, to keep me from doing it. And even more than that, to say, that's not my call. Now, I'm also a spiritual director. Like, I mean, I'm a pastor. Like, I believe that there's call, and that, you know what I mean? That we're not called to do everything, right? And so that's true. And yet it takes some real discernment and a lot of loving honesty with ourselves in relationship with somebody else to ask those questions, to say, it, you know, what's the difference between my call to saying no to something that's not my call, and saying no to something because it's feels too complicated or too big. And what's the role? How am I grappling with that from that individualistic standpoint? And if I actually believed and had people with me so that I knew I wasn't having to go into that uncomfortable place, that stretching place by myself, like if I could take that for granted, how much more brave would I be? So anyway, that was just sort of a lot, but it really stimulated my a lot of what I've been grappling with myself.
And
I
if I'm
think
speaking too often, just tell me. But going into this, also thinking about the unforming kind of things, some of the reading I've been doing, and in our individuality, our individualism, we are on a linear platform, you know, where if you do this, it will get you this. And this work is circular. You know, you're going to take a step forward and you're going to take 2 steps back. And sometimes you're going to get to go 3 forward and maybe you won't go back, but you'll go back again. And we don't know how to do circular. We in our Western culture, where if I invest this time, I expect this result. And so if I don't get this result, do I want to invest the time? I think holds us back, but I think that's tied to the individualism.
Thanks, Sunny. Alice, you were starting to say something.
Yeah, thinking about the idea of being called to certain work and not other, and not being able to do it all. I think even though we can't necessarily work on all of everything, we can keep our awareness of all the work that is being done and needs to continue to be done. And that really is part of the work also. You know, if I'm working on this thing, but I remember that this thing also has an impact on this thing that I'm not working on, that's an important piece of the work.
I forget for the recording, I'm gonna read a little bit from the chat. So yeah, people aren't left out. Thank you, Jill. Our coaches want you to know you don't have to journey alone. Yes, Alice, both and to remember that other people are grateful that we are doing what we're doing so they can do what is theirs to do.
And I think that helps us to define what beloved community is that we each come with our gifts and our energy and our passions, and we support each other in that work together. And we're all called for that work. It just may look different and feel different in different times. But that's why we need each other to be the whole community.
Tammy, I appreciate you saying that. Someone criticized me for the daily calls that I do to the 2 senators and House of Representative person. And I was accused of being too broad in my approach, and that I needed to pick one thing that I was passionate about, or that I was really called to, and stick with just that. And I'm like, friend, there's energy for both. Like, I don't know. And so your statement is helping me feel solid on that. I had other words. They won't be shared now.
I appreciate not having to edit something out.
Who hasn't spoken yet today, or not too much? We'd love to hear everyone's voice, even with something, even just letting us know like how it feels to be processing this. Or maybe everyone has spoken a little bit. I don't know. I can't remember.
I'm feeling the weight of my grandchildren today who are Indigenous, and just thinking about what's been stolen from them, and how they have been impacted by lots of the challenges of being Indigenous, and their parents and grandparents and all what they went through, and how that trauma continues to impact them today. So that's just something that I feel on my heart today.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy.
Probably not just today, probably every day, but it particularly now.
Yeah.
Honor that also posted in the chat by someone. I'm feeling overwhelmed today, so it's hard to speak up or even have my video on. I'm grateful to be able to just be at the edge of this space today to keep my learning moving. We're glad
Mm,
you're here.
yep. Thank you for the honesty.
Trying to read faces. Is silence what is needed today for a little bit? Or do y'all want to reflect some more? Guessing that's my answer.
I was going to just speak it aloud, that silence indeed was something that I'm comfortable with at this point because it just feels heavy today.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a thumbs up,
Mm-hmm.
Linda, for heaviness and silence.
Yeah, I just wanted maybe about some intentionality, saying like maybe for 5 minutes, let's just hold space together and touch base after that.
And if you do feel words coming, put them in the chat. And when we come back together in a few minutes, we'll read what's there, or we'll just listen to the silence. But we're together. Just remember that we're together in this. This is not a solitary silence.
was 4 minutes. Does it feel okay if I go ahead and read what's in the chat? My growth has been to appreciate the silence together, even when it makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Amen. Amen. I am aware of how many times I wrote in the margins. This is still happening today. It is stunning how slow we are to learn how to be in right relationship with one another, and how deep our greed runs and pushes us to treat others in such atrocious ways. It's so hard knowing termination in so many forms in our Indigenous communities is still going on today, and feeling so helpless against the forces of government, white government, that are complex, often underground, and persistent in not fulfilling promises and obligations, the structure that was forcing termination. In the silence, I'm reminded of the gift of being disillusioned. It can be so painful, but the opposite is to live in a state of illusion. The structure that was forcing terminations in Deloria's day is deep and hard to navigate. My friend Pastor Mary Jensen wrote a book called We Belong to the Land, which is about Palestine and Israel. I'm reminded of this reading and in the stories of discrimination and wrongs that it was and is so often about land, not people. Since the book was written more than 50 years ago, there isn't an update on how hard so many terminated tribes have worked to get their recognized status back and how much work there still is to be done. It's particularly hard to be reading this right now in light of all the emails in my inbox about cuts in so many areas that are ongoing. Trying to not lose heart seems the first challenge I face today, then where to dive in with the energy I have.
Thank you so much, Jason, just for the suggestion to be quiet together. Because clearly a lot of wisdom and insight rose up in that silence. So I'm just so grateful for that. We've been kind of weaving in and out of this question, where and how does one dive in? And so I'm going to share something, a resource that I'm going to avail myself of. This is not an endorsement from coaching ministry. It's not, I'm just offering this as Solveig, as a person participating in this book study. But it's a 6-week online thing coming up starting a week from yesterday, and it's from the School of the Great Turning, which is Joanna Macy's organization. Her work is deep and rich. She brings in Adrienne Marie Brown, whose work is deep and rich. She brings in Dr. Lila June, who is a Navajo Dene woman whose work is deep and rich. And so it's a process for doing exploration about what is my gift I'm offering to this time, and living that on purpose. But it's deeper just than where do I get involved, right? It's what's mine. I'm a unique, just like every other living being in the created world. We all have a unique place in the ecosystem, and so helping us each clarify for ourselves what our unique place is and gift is. So again, not an endorsement from coaching ministry or anything else, but just wanted to share that since the topic came up a few times today. And it looks like we're almost at
I know.
time to start our shifting. Anything else you want to say before we move into our beginning our closing reflection, Jason? Or
I think I'm curious about that. Like, what are people hearing, or what are they taking away, or what's resonating?
Yeah, in a word or a phrase, or a sentence. Yeah, what came up powerfully for you? What was a powerful learning through the process, through the content, through your experience? Sadness, It's real.
It's important to take time to lament together.
Again, you're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. From Jane, the silence was helpful to regroup for me today. But knowing that Indian people and others have carried this for generations says there are things I can learn from others to help me right now. Yeah, and repeated greed and harm to our companions on the journey.
Think for me, reflecting on the individualism, which, you know, it runs deep, right? Like it's so entrenched in us and our culture, and being reminded of like community here, like with y'all, right? Like we're not alone in this. Solveig as my peer in this reminds me constantly I'm not alone in this. I mean, it's just like, but it's amazing to me how many times I have to be reminded, like it's not sinking in. I still have that feeling of like, no, I have to do this, or I've got to figure out what I need to do or what I can do. And it's not me at all. Like it's us. Um, yeah. I just I feel like I need to say it aloud for myself, not for any of you to hear. This is for Jason. Oh, more from the chat. This is one story, and unfortunately, there are too many stories that are sad, heavy, and wrong that resonate with what we learned in our reading and conversation.
I think one of the things that I'm taking away in a deeper way is this awareness that's, I think, been trying to grow in me of one of the lies that that I have been taught and believed is that things were bad in the past and then they were getting better. And that's not true in some ways. Like I can't deny that on some levels that's absolutely true, that there was progress, right? Backlash comes because there's progress made. And yet learning from Indigenous people, just seeing the threads, this is an unbroken thread. It's absolutely an unbroken thread. You know, there might be just like a little, you know, he mentions in the chapter, you know, there's like little movements, right, where there's some possibility, and then just like immediately they're, as soon as they're detected, you know, there's a reaction. And so that's a piece that is still sinking into me, that reality of the unbroken thread, and the and therefore the reaping what has been sown, and what that means.
I'm also struck by the if it's not impacting me, then it's not something that I necessarily will be attuned to or aware of or invested in. And that's that me. idea, and the work that I sense that we're doing together is to be we, and I just feel like that's so valuable, and I hope that it catches on and that we continue to grow in the we, because none of us can do it alone.
I think it's important that we really take in that we need to heal, because we've all had that history of violence. I've been reading the history of my ancestors, and the violence is enough to make you barf. And then broken, like hurt people, and it carries on from generation to generation. So our healing, not only for the benefit of people we've hurt, but for us to stop that, what's the word?
Like that pattern.
Yeah, the pattern continuing from generation to generation.
Thank you all for these reflections, your time, your space, all that with us today. I don't think we knew what to expect, and yeah, acknowledging there's sadness here. And it can be heavy, and we're not carrying it alone. So just to honor the time today, I want to thank you for helping us create beloved community in this space with an objective of healing together. I love that y'all are naming that too. It takes each of us and all of us. So just a few upcoming events. Tomorrow is your next opportunity for Module 1 of Moving Toward Right Relations. That's a free training offered by the Coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. And they're doing that every other month. So if you can't make this one, be watching the coaching calendar. I'm trying to post those at least a couple months in advance. So the one for, is that May, is already posted as well. So you could save, the date in your calendar if the March one doesn't work out for you. Next week, please join us back in the space for Creating Beloved Community. Nobody journeys alone. Oh, and Sylvie's putting those links in the chat. Thank you. And then next month on the second Wednesday, that's April 9th, feel free to join us back here for our next reading circle covering chapter 4.
And as you leave here today, please remember that you are seen, that you are valued, that you are loved, that you are not alone.
And so are you.
Blessings. Thank you. Blessings all. Take good care. See you next month.